Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, helping you prepare for the PMP exam. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, where we help remove your PMP exam prep study constraints in pursuit of your certification. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. The competing project constraints are the main topic of this lesson. As a project manager, the number and type of activities in which you engage to successfully complete the project, they're often based on the different competing project constraints that exist on any project. So in this lesson we will focus on giving you some crucial competing project constraint information by defining what is meant by a constraint, listing the 6 major project constraints, describing why these constraints compete for project resources. We'll give you example of the effect that changing one constraint may have over another, explain why it's necessary to balance these constraints, and outlining the benefits that are gained when you balance these constraints. One of the major characteristics of a successful project manager is the ability to effectively manage these competing project constraints throughout the life of the project. This includes not only recognizing these constraints, but also making sound trade-off decisions to help increase the probability of project success. Before we jump into the major constraints here, let's take a look at a definition of what is meant by a constraint in terms of a project. According to the PMBOK guide, a constraint is a limiting factor that affects the execution of a project, program, portfolio, or process. Although there can be many factors that limit the effective execution of a project, there are 6 major factors or constraints that affect the majority of projects and actually compete with each other on most projects most of the time. So, constraints will influence practically every single area of your project's processes. The PMBOK guide specifically lists 6 constraints that you must effectively manage. They are scope, time, cost, quality, resources, and risk. So why do these constraints exist, and why do they compete with each other? It is because at any given time during a project you will have a single driving force that represents where the project's resources will be focused, which can and often does change during the project. Constraints are used to help evaluate competing project demands. When these demands change, the project manager, you, have to decide which other competing constraint or constraints will be impacted and will have to be adjusted to successfully complete the project. This involves constantly determining the priority of each constraint, which often fluctuates. Changes are inevitable on a project, and both stakeholders internal to your project, such as senior management or the customer, or forces external to the project, like legal or regulatory agencies, will constantly try to add or change something on your project to meet their current needs. As the project manager, you must make the decision on which of these requested changes of the constraints will most positively or negatively affect the project, and implement those changes you decide will maximize the chance of project success. There are literally dozens, if not hundreds, of different scenarios that may cause changes in the priorities of each of our 6 competing project constraints. So instead of the traditional thought process of using a triangle to envision the 3 major competing project constraints, in the past they used to be called triple constraints, let's use a hexagon to envision these constraints. To ensure project success, you must accept the clear fact in terms of the relationships between these constraints that if any one constraint changes, at least one other constraint is likely to be affected, and usually more than one is affected. Now let's take a look at each of these 6 competing project constraints and some specific examples of how a change in one can trigger or require a change in another. Our first competing project constraint is scope, or requirements, which refers to the sum of the products, services and results to be provided as a project. So what type of constraints might scope present on our project? Well, scope changes may be introduced by the project's customer, who decides that they want to remove functionality, or more likely they want to add functionality to the finished product. They may also be introduced as part of regulatory compliance, such as regulations that are imposed by outside governing agencies, such as the FDA, or voluntary compliance using standards such as ISO standards or ANSI standards may also cause changes in the scope constraint on your project. An increase in scope on our project could easily affect both the schedule, which is time, or the budget, which is cost. Because if you increase the scope, then either time or cost has to go up because we now have more to do. If, however, we decide, well, the scope has increased, but we really cannot increase the time, we have to deliver this at the predefined project scheduled end, then what will most likely happen is that your quality is going to drop. Think about it. You have more to do. You don't have any more money to do it. You have the same time. So something has to give. And you're very likely going to rush through things just so that you can deliver your project on time. Your quality will go down. Our second competing project constraint is the cost, or the budget, which refers to the approved estimate for the project or any work breakdown structure component or any schedule activity. Budget changes may be introduced by the organization who's performing the project if it is decided that more funds need to be funneled away from your project to other higher priority projects. The budget may also need to be increased if you lose key resources on your project and you decide that you need to outsource some of the work and bring in consultants at a higher rate to finish the project. In addition, if your project is running behind schedule, certain discretionary funds, such as contingency reserves or management reserves, may have to be funneled toward your project to help it complete successfully. By way of example, an increase or decrease in budget could easily affect both the scope of the project and the quality of the delivered product. As an example, if your budget is decreased, then the scope of the project may also have to be decreased because you have less money to pay for all the resources to build all that big scope you had in the beginning. You have less money, so somehow functionality has to be removed from the delivered product. If, however, you decide, no, budget has gone down, but we're not going to decrease the scope, well, that means in regards to quality, that is again going to have to drop. You have the same time, you have the same scope, but you have a lot less money to deliver your product. Well, again, somehow you're going to have to manage, and your quality is very likely going to drop again. Our third competing project constraint is time, or schedule, which refers to the planned dates for performing schedule activities and the planned dates for meeting scheduled milestones. Schedule changes may be introduced by your organization depending on the specific availability of team members for the project. The schedule may also need to be increased dependent on the expertise of the team. If you have several experienced team members, you may have a shorter schedule, while using more inexperienced junior team members may require a longer schedule. In addition, your project may be delayed if your project is dependent upon other projects being completed before you can start work on your activities. Again, let's take a look at how this works and how an increase or decrease in your schedule could easily affect both the budget, which is the cost, and the risk. So, for example, if your schedule time is decreased, so you now have a shorter schedule, you have to finish off things faster, you may have to increase your project's budget. This typically happens if there's a need to crash or shorten the schedule to meet a new deadline that is more aggressive than the existing one. But if you decide not to increase the budget, even though your schedule has been decreased, then this may increase the amount of risk on the project in terms of inferior quality products being delivered, not meeting the new schedule deadline. And all of this, by the way, could also result in decreased customer satisfaction. So we're also starting to touch upon criteria here that are outside of our 6 project constraints, but that will still be affected because customer satisfaction is not one of the 6 recognized competing project constraints in the PMBOK guide. Yet, customer satisfaction will go down if you don't deliver on time. Our 4th competing project constraint is quality, which refers to the degree in which a set of inherent characteristics fulfills requirements. Quality changes may once again be introduced by your organization in terms of voluntary compliance with other standards such as ISO or ANSI standards in order to meet higher quality standards for the delivered product. An increase in quality may also be mandated by external legal or regulatory organizations that you must follow. In addition, there may be an inadvertent decrease in quality if the procedures outlined in the quality management plan are not followed and the level of defects delivered to the customer is increased. And how does this work in regards to the competing project constraints? Well, an increase or decrease in quality can affect many other project constraints, including schedule, budget, and risk on your project. For example, if the quality needs to be increased, then, due to mandatory compliance, the budget needs to be increased as well to pay for the extra scope that is required to deliver this new level of product quality. If, however, you choose not to implement the quality standards and then you get audited, the financial penalties, they may be severe, which increases the level of risk of the project and possibly even the budget if these penalties are charged to the project budget in the end. Our 5th competing project constraint are resources, which refers to skilled human resources, equipment, services, supplies, commodities, materials, budgets, or even funds. Resource changes may be introduced again by your organization depending on the specific availability of both human resources and physical resources. Resources may also need to be increased dependent on the scope of the project. If the customer decides they want increased functionality, that's increased scope in the deliverables, this could trigger a need for increased resources in terms of both personnel and materials. In addition, your project's schedule may even be shortened if you obtain a piece of equipment that tests software code faster or hire a consultant who can be more productive in a shorter period of time. In other words, increase or decrease in resources can affect many other project constraints, including the schedule, the budget, and your risk. For example, if your resources are decreased on a budget because some machinery is pulled off to be used on another project, then the schedule may need to be extended because it will take more time to complete the original work. You don't have that machine now, and all the labor has to be done manually. All right? So far, so good. But what if we decide, well, we have just had to give away these resources, but there's no way that we can increase the schedule. The schedule has to remain the same. This means there's going to be a need to crash or shorten the schedule. So we're going to have to bring more people in to replace the machine that we have removed. And guess what? Bringing more people in means we're going to have to increase our budget. Our sixth and last competing project constraint is risk, which refers to an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on one or more project objectives. Risk changes may be introduced both internally and externally at any point during the project, which is why risk management is such an important ongoing task for you as a project manager. Resources may also be increased despite the fact that effective risk management is being performed. It is impossible, or not worth the effort, to determine every possible risk that may occur on your project and develop an effective risk response plan, since it's simply not cost effective. In addition, the level of effort that is involved in implementing risk response plans may be underestimated in terms of time and cost, and sometimes may even introduce additional risk to the project. Let's once again take a look at how this affects the other project constraints, in particular schedule and budget. For example, if the risk is increased on the project, say if something was surfacing that was not anticipated, so an unknown risk has suddenly crept up, then you as the project team leader may decide, well, we're just going to extend the schedule. It's just going to take us longer to deal with this problem. If, however, you say, well, yeah, the risk has gone up, but there's no way that we can in fact increase our schedule, well, that's going to mean that you have to bring in new people, new resources to deal with this problem. And that means you're going to have to jack up your budget so that you can hire these people, so that these people can deal with that unknown risk that suddenly appeared on your project. As you can see, each of these 6 constraints on your project are constantly competing with each other and have a profound effect on your project success. This is why it is crucial for you as the project manager to effectively balance these constraints throughout the project. Project stakeholders may have differing ideas as to which factors are the most important ones at any given time during the project, creating an even greater challenge for you as the project manager. Effective balancing of constraints helps you effectively assess each situation and balance the demands in order to deliver a successful project, as well as actively manage the trade-offs that are required to best meet the project constraints at any given time on the project. Project managers have the responsibility of providing the sponsor with information on all sides of these competing project constraints, of that hexagon that we looked at, and how each of these constraints contributes to project success. Your project will most likely fail when one of the constraints changes and you do not make appropriate adjustments to the other constraints. So we know it's important for you as the project manager to balance these constraints. The benefits of balancing include helping both you and the project team to consistently evaluate the competing project demands so that intelligent decisions can be made on what changes need to be made to other constraints, as well as on the project as a whole, to ensure success. Focusing the efforts of the project team and project stakeholders on the most important priority at any given time of the project is another benefit. And the third benefit is that it ensures that everyone involved in the project is always sharing the same goals and performing the tasks that are necessary to achieve those goals. Let's review. A constraint is any factor on a project that limits its proper execution. There are 6 major project constraints, and they are scope, cost, time, quality, resources, and risk. Each of these constraints is in constant competition with the others to be the top priority constraint on the project. A change in any one of these constraints must result in a change in one or more of the others, and you as the project manager must balance these constraints to ensure project success. And with that, we have come to the end of this lesson and our review of the competing project constraints. So it's time for Justine to say,
Keep up the good work. You're doing a great job. See ya.
and of course I say, until next time.